opportunity to present our work. To start off, eyewitness misidentifications are the leading cause of false convictions in the United States, accounting for 70% of cases. Research so far has supported that eyewitness confidence is a robust predictor of accuracy. What I'm showing here is an influential 2017 review paper by Wixted and Wells that has already been cited over 200 times. Their analyses showed that eyewitness confidence was protective against a number of factors that we know influence eyewitness memory. For example, we know that the race of a police suspect can influence accuracy. People generally are worse at remembering faces of a different race from themselves. For instance, when a Black victim attempts to identify a white perpetrator from a lineup. Based on Wixted and Wells' analysis, we see evidence for a cross-race effect at lower levels of confidence. When confidence was low, participants in this study were more accurate at identifying a same-race culprit than if the crime was committed by a person of a different race. Yet at higher levels of confidence, there is seemingly no difference. The review paper finds a similar confidence accuracy relationship for many other variables. For example, the weapon focus effect and retention interval. Despite these findings, we still see high confidence errors in the lab and in the real world. For this reason, our research examines factors that systematically predict high confidence errors. To start off, I'd like to talk about some of my previous work that has investigated this issue. One thing that is common in the eyewitness memory field is to treat all witnesses the same. However, intuitively, we know that this is not the case. In fact, the ability to recognize unfamiliar faces varies widely across the population. At the low end are those with developmental prosopagnosia, or face blindness, who may have difficulty recognizing even family members and close friends. While at the high end, there are super recognizers who exhibit exceptional face recognition ability, but most individuals fall somewhere in the middle. So how do we test face recognition ability in the lab? We use a well-validated measure, the Cambridge Face Memory Test. This test measures poor to above average face recognition ability over 72 trials of varying difficulty. An individual score is simply the number of trials they get correct, where higher scores indicate greater face recognition ability. Here is an example of what the test looks like. First, individuals memorize a target face in 3 separate orientations. Then, they must identify this face among 2 additional fillers. And the test grows more challenging over subsequent trials, for example, by incorporating visual noise. Recently, I investigated how face recognition ability influences the rate of high confidence errors in eyewitness memory. In this study, participants first encoded 12 still images of faces, each exhibiting a casual expression such as a smile. After a delay, participants performed a standard eyewitness lineup procedure. In this procedure, the participant attempts to identify whether a previously seen face is present in the 2x3 array of mugshots. After each decision, participants provided a confidence rating, indicating how certain they were about the accuracy of their response. Next, they performed the Cambridge Face Memory Test. Here's the distribution of the scores from the CMMT for 569 participants. The median score is 61, and the blue shading indicates 1 median absolute deviation above and below the average score. Again, higher scores reflect stronger face recognition ability. Let's get to the results. To orient you to the graph, the x-axis represents the participant's face recognition ability, with higher scores indicating greater ability level. This dashed line represents the average face recognition score across participants. The y-axis gives the percentage of identifications that resulted in a correct decision, and the colored lines will represent different levels of confidence. First, let's look at results from participants who are above average face recognizers. As we can see, the results are concordant with previous studies. As represented by the red line, when good face recognizers use a 100% confidence rating, they tend to be pretty accurate. However, if we look at below average face recognizers, we start to see a different story. High confidence identifications become less indicative of accuracy as face recognition ability decreases. In fact, if we compare the accuracy of high confidence identifications from participants who are 1 standard deviation above the average score to those 1 deviation below, we see a gap of about 25 percentage points. So results from the study indicated that the value of high confidence ratings differs across face recognition ability. However, one question I had was whether the results of the lineup study would extend to situations that more closely mirror our daily experiences recognizing people. For example, you may need to recognize people from strange angles, or at different ages, or when they make the regrettable decision to bleach their hair in secondary school. To address this question, in a recent paper, I reanalyzed a dataset from Devue and colleagues. In Devue et al. Study, 32 participants were tested on their ability to recognize actors from the popular television series Game of Thrones. This approach comes with several advantages. For example, actors are encountered under more naturalistic conditions with differences in lighting, viewing angle, and age. Most importantly, there was incidental encoding in a much less controlled environment than my previous study. All participants watched 6 seasons in order as the show aired without knowing that they would later need to recognize the actors. And if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you know that many characters are killed throughout the series. This creates some natural retention intervals based on the last time the actor appeared on the show. Participants needed to recognize faces from as far back as season 1, or 6 years. And actors had varying amounts of screen time. Leading actors had the most screen time, whereas bit parts had the least. Upon entering the study, participants took the CFMT Plus, which is an expanded version of the CFMT. They then completed an old-new recognition test of 168 faces, half old actors and half new foils. Half of the participants completed the task with actors who looked similar to their most recent appearance in the show, whereas the other half saw a version where the actors were as dissimilar as possible. And just to acquaint you to the task, this is an actor that the participants viewed in the show. On each trial, participants needed to choose whether or not they had seen this person before. And in this case, a yes response would be a correct identification. After making their decision, participants provided a confidence rating ranging from 1 to 5. 1 is the least confident, whereas 5 is the most confident. So, is confidence predictive of identification accuracy in this highly uncontrolled context? The answer appears to be yes. This pattern holds for large retention intervals, in this case spanning 3 years or more. Moreover, it largely holds for changes in exposure duration. However, you'll notice that performance for bit parts is poor across levels of confidence. We think that this is explained by chance levels of performance in this condition. Finally, high confidence seems to be indicative of good identification accuracy for both similar and dissimilar faces. However, our main focus was whether this confidence accuracy relationship changes across the span of face recognition ability. We find that it does. Poor face recognizers are once again more likely to make high confidence misidentifications than better face recognizers. This pattern holds across retention intervals, across exposure durations, again except for bit parts, and finally across face similarity. So the take-home message from this study are that confidence ratings were generally predictive of accuracy in a difficult naturalistic test of face recognition. And we replicated that face recognition ability influences the reliability of high confidence ratings, despite using other researchers' data and a much more ecologically valid context. Concluding, I would like to bring up a couple points for discussion. First, how can we better map insights from the lab onto real-world face recognition? TV shows are a good start, but there are still some clear differences from everyday life. For example, what is the plot line for the person you met at this conference? Second, we need to better understand the influence of individual difference on experimental outcomes. I believe face recognition ability likely explains some, but not all of the differences we see in the predictive value of a confidence statement. For example, there's some work that looks at the effects of age and finds a similar pattern. Finally, I want to thank all of my collaborators, both at the University of Virginia and elsewhere, especially my advisor, Chad Dodson, for helping me extensively with these projects. And that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So interesting. And also you finally created an experiment that participants will want to complete if they're looking at their favorite characters.
Yeah, well, Devue et al. Created the experiment.
So. Are there any questions or anyone got any discussion points for Jesse based on what he's got there on the screen? I know I can see in the chat that we've got some comments from Steve that you've got a beautiful graph. I agree with that. That's brilliant.
Melissa, I do have a question. I enjoyed this paper, Jesse. It's really good. My question is slightly maybe different from what your focus is, but it seems to me that one of the things that we really need to work on at some point is how to improve the confidence accuracy relationship at those medium level confidence ratings, because and potentially even the high confidence ratings, because I know that we kind of initially started with 90% plus is very likely to be accurate, but what we're seeing is the rates are kind of around 85% in your data, my data. So I'd love to hear your insights on that.
Yeah, so that's a really good point to bring up, because if you look at the actual, how these confidence statements are actually used in real world context, you'll find that in a lot of cases, people who are falsely convicted were convicted based on middling confidence values. So I guess one point that I would make is it seems like at the very least, these individual differences can explain some variation in how people allocate their confidence ratings across the scale. So my colleague in my lab, Jessica Gettleman, just recently published a paper, forgetting the journal, JEP-LMC, that shows that it seems that across the face recognition ability span, better face recognizers seem to be better able to know the context in which they'll be inaccurate, so they reallocate their confidence accordingly. However, worse recognizers seem to use the scale basically the same across both good and poor face recognition contexts. So I think that is actually a very important point, where we're just sort of assuming that everyone's relying on these same metacognitive cues when they're making these judgments. However, I'm not sure that's actually the case based on individual differences and maybe differences in context. So I think both of these points are really important to investigate in future work.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Jesse, I think we've got a question from Colin in the chat there. Can you see the chat function, or do you want me to read it?
Yes.
Chat's at the bottom.
What do you use to fit the curves on the graphs? Loess, GAM, ggplot. Okay. Yes, so the curves are fitted based on a GLMER model, so generalized linear mixed effects model, which has its estimates calculated by the effects package, which are then subsequently plotted in ggplot. So the short of it is I'm using a generalized linear mixed effects model and then plotting that output.
Steve said wicked cool. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And if you go online, there's also the ROC curve approach, which finds the exact same thing. So if the approach is kind of the issue, there are other approaches in the paper as well that you can look at.
Fab. That's great. I was just thinking through there. What's the benefit of using that method over and above just plotting the empirical data? Can you, I guess it's a way of, sorry, I'll ask you the question rather than answering it myself. So you've used a model there to draw your curves. What's the benefit of doing that instead of just plotting the points and then?
Yeah, so there are a couple things, at least in this Game of Thrones study, that I think are important to consider. One has to do with the aspect of binning. So if you're going to be plotting across a continuous value, such as CFMT, if you're going to do it in a discretized fashion, you're going to have some, principled method to figure out what those bins should be before you start the plot. So based on the fact that we had so few participants in the study, we could only really do a median split, and that analysis seemed to show a similar pattern to what we found in these generalized linear mixed effects curves. The other point is that, when you bin things if you bin everyone into the same group, you're not really necessarily capturing differences in individuals. And there's at least some evidence approaches that don't do this can inflate type 1, type 2 error rates. I think there's a Moriyama paper that talks about that. So I'm not saying that the other approaches aren't valid or invalid. I'm saying that you should probably consider using multiple approaches and make sure they all come out in the same direction.
Brilliant. Awesome answer. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jessie. I guess, again, we'll send around contact details and things in case there's further questions from people. Thank you. We seem to have managed to get back on time. So next up, we've got a speaker, Ruth Horry, who's from Swansea University, a lecturer there. So thank you very much, Ruth, for spending your time to do this again today. Can you hear me, and are you able to?
Yeah.
Yes, awesome, fab. Okay.
Can you see my screen?
I can see it perfectly. That looks great to me. Thank you very much. So yeah, ready to go when you are. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to